Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen. I will be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being webcast so that on the council's website, so that members of the public, or indeed anybody who should so choose, who are unable to be here in person, can observe us remotely. So best smiles, everybody. Can I invite board members and guests to introduce themselves? And could I please remind you to mute your microphone once you have introduced yourself? We will start just for a bit of a change on the right.
Good morning, everyone. Rob Clayton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Good morning, Councillor Amanda Carter, Carville and Farsley.
Morning, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Sorry, Chair. Phil Evans, Chief Officer for Transformation and Partnership. You normally start that side, so that's what threw me. So I'm so sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Social Care.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Longworth and I'm Director for Children and Families.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Dan Barton and I'm the Deputy Director for Learning.
Good morning, Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Nkela Manaka, representing Birmingham and Richmond Hill.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Oliver Edwards, representing Guiseley and Rawdon.
Good morning, Councillor Caroline Gruen, representing Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Mahaley France-Meyer. I'm substituting today for Councillor Bowden.
Hello, everyone. Lisa Martin, representing Round Haywood.
Councillor Jules Hesselwood, representing Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Alison Robin Hood Ward.
Morning, Andrew Graham, co-opted member representing the Church of England Diocese.
Good morning, I'm Helen Bellamy and I'm a school staff representative.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome, Mahalia, and thank you for subbing for Councillor Bowden this morning. Thanks for coming along. Rob, could you take us through, please, items 1 to 5?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just the procedural items of business. Number 1 is appeals against refusal of inspection of documents, and there are no appeals, Chair. Item 2 is items for exclusion from for the press or public, and there are no items for exclusion. Item 3 is late items of business, and there are no late items, Chair. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Can I just ask members if they have any declarations of interest under the Leeds City Council Code of Conduct? I will take silence as none. Thank you. And then item 5 is apologies, Chair. We have a few this morning. So we have Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Bowden, as already noted, Councillor France-Meyer is subbing for Councillor Bowden, and Councillor Downs. There's also apologies from Jackie Ward, Mr. Anas Kittu, Tony Britton, Laura Whittaker, and as noted by us yesterday, Councillor Venner is the exec member. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. And while we will write to her specifically, we could pass on our best wishes to Councillor Venner for a full and speedy recovery. We shall miss her today. Thank you for that. So let's turn then to the minutes of our meeting on the 22nd of February, which is in page 7 of your pack. As usual, I shall go through page by page and hopefully won't skip out any numbers. So page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, and last but by no means least, page 16. And can somebody who was at the meeting approve those as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Thank you very much indeed. Before we go on to item 7, just a reminder, we have been incredibly robust on this scrutiny board around, I suppose, what I could best describe as party politicking. We've been really clear that we are here for children and families, and that we are not going to engage in party politics or politicising any more than is strictly necessary. That's always been the case on this board, but I have been asked to specifically flag that up because we are now in the pre-election purdah period, and therefore I will be even more robust than I normally would. So please bear that in mind. I would hate to use the button I've just discovered this morning that cuts off people's microphones, but I will across the piece if people start abusing the fact that we are now in the pre-election purdah period. I'm sure everybody's fully taken that on note. I've looked at a number of people who might stray beyond that line, and you both did little wry smiles, so that's always good. So let's then move on to item 7, which is the independent review of children's social care, the update on implementation. Councillor Pryor, do you want to say anything by way of introduction, or we're going to Julie, who's going to lead off on this then? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report does follow a report that was presented to Scrutiny in September 23, and that outlined the plans for the implementation of the National Review into Children's Social Care that was led by Josh McAllister. Since then, the report sets out that a number of documents have been published by the government at a national level, including updated statutory guidance. And that statutory guidance and those updated documents are really in support of the recommendations in the National Review. Nationally, a number of those recommendations haven't been progressed for a range of reasons. However, you will see in the report that Leeds has chosen to progress some of those. And that's where we really feel that in doing so, it is in the best interests of children and young people in the city, and also in the best interest of us being able to continue to improve and further develop our services so that we can achieve greater and improved outcomes for children and families. So I will leave it there. The Scrutiny is asked, I suppose, just to note the content of the report, note the specific documents, the specific changes that have been made at a national level. And we do intend to bring another report back in the autumn, which will give a further update just in terms of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Julia. And I'm really pleased that one of the recommendations is that we look at this again in autumn, because it's almost a bit preemptive, isn't it, at this precise moment? But nonetheless, I'm pleased you brought the report. Thank you for bringing it. Just before we open up, para 44 references a couple of areas where Leeds is hoping to be a pilot network, a pilot authority, sorry, on family networks and regional care cooperatives. Has anything been done on that to take any of that forward at the moment?
Yes, so we've had the outcome of our bids, and regretfully, we're not part of those pathfinders. But I can assure you that is not going to stop Leeds, the director, and our partners continuing to progress the developments that we've had in mind. We're not dependent on being a pathfinder, and Leeds has continued to pave the way, and we've got no intention to detract from that.
Leeds, as we say. Questions and comments, colleagues? Thank you.
On the last point that you've made, when you were saying we're not a pathfinder, which is a little bit disappointing, but you're going to continue the good work, as it were. Is there any reason why we couldn't behave as if we were a pathfinder and actually do those things anyway?
I've clearly not articulated myself very well, because absolutely that's the point that I was making. When the National Care Review was undertaken, Josh McAllister and others came and met with myself, met with colleagues across the directorate, across the partnership. And what you see in the national report and in the recommendations really is a whole host of developments that actually, which we have had underway in Leeds for many years. So that focus on family, that focus on trust in relationships, the focus on kinship care, the focus on family group conferencing, the focus on, I suppose, rebalancing the system, and ensuring that our approach is strength-based, recognising that children and families in the main are struggling with adversity, and us approaching our work in that way. So absolutely, and that was my point. It's not we have a host of plans in place right across the partnership, and we will be pushing on with those as ever.
Thank you, Chair. And with regards to, reading through this, being a pathfinder means there is financial gaining with it. How are we going to deliver, without the money? And as we know, financially, we are constrained. How are we going to do it? Thanks.
No, thank you. That's a very good question. I think when we have met, I think it's important to say that when we have met with colleagues at a national level, I think there's a view clearly that Leeds is absolutely committed to continuous improvement, and in some ways we're doing it anyway. And we've I suppose continuing to work on the good foundations that we've set over many years. It's challenging, obviously, as you're right, it's disappointing because the Pathfinder would have brought that additional investment. But I think over the years, I think we've got very good as a partnership in terms of, I suppose, having to do more with less, and being creative around that. We've just had a joint targeted area inspection of the theme was serious youth violence, and a joint targeted area inspection is the inspection of the whole partnership. So we had education, children's social care, health, police, probation, the youth custody service, and actually it was a really fantastic opportunity, I suppose, for us to be reminded of the really successful partnership that we have got in Leeds, and the commitment and dedication across that partnership to be creative, to think about the resources that we've got, to think about how we can pool them, how we can use them differently. So as an example, when we will, be implementing, I suppose, our family help service, that's got to be multi-agency, and we will be looking at everything from how we use our resources in terms of, staff, first and foremost. I suppose how we look at our training, as an example, in terms of coming together, how we use our buildings, how we use our assets. It's very much about, as a partnership, how we can utilise what we've got to best effect. I think the other thing for me, and again, it's referenced in today's report, and it's referenced in the National Review and also in the update in terms of working together, is how we really, really continue to engage with our communities and our voluntary community sector in the city. And I think we have, again, fantastic voluntary sector and community sector organisations in the city who are doing wonderful things with children every day of the week, who don't perhaps have the stigma that some statutory services do have. So there's something, again, we're really committed, I suppose, going forward to have that as a priority in terms of how we work collaboratively with agencies right across the city to be able to do more at a time when we do all have less.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I was reading about the kinship care part of this, and I know this is an area that your department is very interested in, and there's a lot of great work that's being done. I was wondering, reading this, how does the work we're doing here compare with other core cities and other local authorities? So I know there's quite a lot that's being done, but it'd be helpful to get an idea of how we're doing compared with other comparable authorities.
I'll come in and then Farah might want to come in as well. I think perhaps the first thing to say is that we continue to have a higher proportion of children who are looked after who are with family than other local authorities. Now, whether that's in family placements with foster carers or actually whether that is in kinship placements with kin. So I suppose the first thing to highlight there is that our commitment, I suppose, to think family, you know, and to really, you know, go above and beyond to try to ensure that children can remain with family is key to our whole philosophy and our whole practice. Again, Leeds, you know, are family valued, you know, which is part of our approach. You will see that again really reflected in the national report. So the fact that we continue to have more children placed with kin, I think evidences, I suppose, you know, that we continue to be successful within that. We have recently, as people know, revised our offer to special guardianship carers. And again, you know, within that kinship carers. So ensuring that where we do have children placed with family placed with kin, that they can move to a position that they're not going to be any detriment to them in terms of financial support and broader support for them to take on special guardianship orders. What that means is that there's less statutory intervention in the life of those children. And that's what we want. You know, we don't want, and children tell us and families tell us, that they don't want statutory intervention where that's not necessary, and it can be very, very intrusive, and none of us want that. I think the other thing is, I suppose, where do we go from here? You know, because it's about not sitting or resting on our laurels, really. So, you know, we have a range of developments in terms of how we continue to expand our kinship carers. Farah might want to come in a minute, just sort of thinking about some of the models that exist elsewhere, which can support practice in that area, which we're currently exploring, developing. One of the key things as well, I suppose, is about listening to kinship carers and listening to families, you know, and hearing from them in terms of how we can improve our services to support them and to increase more families who feel able to look after the children.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bromley.
Morning, Julie. Myself and Councillor Green were on the corporate parenting board yesterday, and we got to meet James that brought the protected characteristic for young children in care to full council, and we're very enthusiastic hearing his voice and the fact that we're focusing on this as a council. I wondered if we could relay this information of the report and the fact that we've discussed it at board today to him, because the one thing that he brought up was that he wasn't sure where it was going from here and what has been focused on so far.
Yeah, feedback.
Yeah.
With pleasure. No, and thank you very much for feeding that back, and we'll make sure that we do that. And I think anybody who's heard James talk cannot help but be moved, you know, and cannot help but I suppose be proud of the fact that this is something that we're doing in Leeds. And I think when you hear James and other young people talk about, I suppose how, you know, how young people who are looked after, young people who've left care, you know, how they perceive that they are seen negatively, you know, and you know, when he spoke at full council and he talked about, you know, children's homes being located in communities, you know, and at times that being seen as a negative by the local community, and how that then feels for a child in terms of their own identity, you know, and everything that comes with that. It's, you know, it's absolutely the right thing. And I'm really proud, you know, that we as a council and as a partnership have taken this forward in Leeds, but we'll definitely feed that back.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Very much support the idea of children being placed with kin. But what happens when it's not safe for a child to be at home with their parents or carers and they're then placed with kin? How robust are the arrangements to keep them separate?
I think one of the hardest areas for a kinship carer to manage is that they are managing dynamics within family. So as a looked after child, the arrangements in relation to reviewing how those family arrangements work, how the family time works for the child with their family, but also supporting the carer in that, the child is entitled to part of their care planning and looked after reviews to make sure that those arrangements are reviewed. I guess if we're talking about immediate safeguarding concerns, then as any child where we have safeguarding concerns, the Section 47 process would be followed. The child will have an allocated social worker when they are a looked after child in a kinship placement, and the kinship carers will also have a supervising social worker. So as in any case with safeguarding, that will be followed robustly with oversight of the manager in relation to Section 47s.
Sorry, just what does that mean in practice?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't explain that very well. What that means is, so under working together, the local authority as well as police and health have safeguarding responsibilities. So where there's a concern that a child has experienced or at risk of significant harm, there will have to be a strategy discussion, a partnership discussion to look at immediate strategies to safeguard that child, and then an investigation done as a partnership.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fransme.
Hello, thank you for the report, and it was really interesting to read because it's an area that I feel quite passionate about. Just leading on from the question that Councillor Carter has just mentioned, there are other dynamics within the kinship carer groups, and it's not just about the adults that are caring for that young person that's been placed with them. It's also about the other family members that are affected with that child. So you've got other young people that are in the household below the age of 18, some of them at primary school, and there is an impact on them psychologically, emotionally, and trauma when it's a kinship placement, because as it's already been mentioned, it's the fact that there are other dynamics to challenge with. So it's a slightly different, well, it's not slightly, it's very much a very different setup for a normal foster caring family to be dealing with. But when it's a kinship placement, there are added pressures and different barriers to navigate. And I think that needs to be recognised more within the report. However, I will say as a kinship carer, the support I've had from yourselves has been wonderful, but there's just a little bit more that could be done. Thank you.
I'll let Farah come in a minute, but I completely agree with what you've said. And I think the point that Councillor Carter made is just around contact as an example. We can't make an assumption that a carer who, kinship carer who's taking on the care of those children, as an example, will be happy to supervise or facilitate contact. Why would we? That's not their, it's not their role. Sometimes kinship carers, want to do that. Sometimes they choose to do that. But it's very much about how we support them in that. Sometimes they don't, and actually it would not be appropriate. So I think for me, there's something, as with all aspects of our work, seeing the individual, so seeing the individual child, seeing the individual kinship carers, seeing the individual family, and the different dynamics and the different pressures, within that, and I suppose, and for me, it comes back to its conversation, isn't it, really, and working with, and that collaborative, strengths-based approach, which is set out in the national review. But I suppose that was my point about continuing to talk to kinship carers, and for us to shape and develop our practice in response to some of those things that you have said. It makes me think a little bit, I suppose, in some ways about young carers, and I've developed and managed young carer services over the years, and just thinking about the impact on siblings, as an example, when there is a child in the family who may have more complex needs, and how we can that can be overlooked. So for me, it all comes back to the commitment that we've got in these, and you do see in the national report about think family. Often when we meet with parents of carers, it's interesting because I suppose the term in the 1989 Children Act, which talks about the welfare of the children being paramount, of course it is. However, we can't forget that children live in families, you know, with parents and carers. And so we have a fundamental role as a directorate, also as a partnership, to ensure that we're supporting the parents and the carers so that they can parent and support the children. We have to have that think family approach. And, you know, I'd like to think that that's what we have got in Leeds.
This discussion reminds me of feedback from kinship carers as part of our voice group, which we listen to views of parents and family across the service, and it's that kinship carers will face the same rigour as foster carers because their connected child is looked after. However, they're still family, and we still have one of the largest family group conference services in the country. That's one offer of support. We also have the therapeutic social work team who provide consultation for foster carers, but that's extended to kinship carers as well, because they can provide that safe space to manage some of the dynamics, to help carers think about that. But it is family dynamics are complicated. They're additionally complicated because often foster carers make a choice to be foster carers. Kinship carers are thrown in a situation that they're not prepared for often, and they're stepping in to safeguard their loved one, their children. And so it is about training, it's about culture, it's about our workforce understanding the different dynamics between being a foster carer and being a kinship carer. So there's something about culture there, which is a heavy focus for us. And the DFE actually came to meet and speak to some of our carers just before the strategy was published. So some of those case examples have been used in the strategy to just understand more the different dynamics for kinship carers.
Thank you for that. Helen.
So I've just got one experience of kinship care through my role in a school, and I could see the two siblings. It was a very different experience for them, because one was clearly experiencing a loss of not being with the parent, even though it was a very unhealthy situation that she was in, and it was clearly the right thing that the kinship care option or route was gone down. But the way that was managed to enable these two children to settle in and to build the relations with their grandmother. And then also one of the children, the older child, he'd not returned home, and they were fearful of where he was, fearful of his safety, but also in terms of the parents and whether he was with them. And there was they knocked at my house, because I had an arrangement to take this child home one day a week, knocked at my house, and it was just everybody swept in, and this child was found and returned to where they needed to be. It was an older child, but clearly there are some really good things in place for those children to make sure that they're safeguarded and that they settle well into their kinship care, from my experience.
Thank you for that, Helen. Councillor Carter is our last contribution on this. Oh, I didn't see. Sorry, Councillor Stevenson as well. Sorry, Councillor Carter.
Thank you. How much weight is given to what the child wants, and how is that implemented?
So, the voice of children, their wishes, their feelings, again, has got to be absolutely central to everything that we do. I've just quoted, the principle of the Children Act being, the welfare of the child being paramount, and within that, their wishes and feelings. Obviously, there's something about age and understanding, give it principle, and so we're very mindful about age and understanding, dependent on the different decisions that children are influencing or making. But for me, and I think for the directorate, it goes back to individual children being seen as individuals in their own right. I think fundamental to that also is building trust in relationships, because actually, we can say we want to support children in being able to share their wishes, share their feelings, share their views. But actually, if they've not got a trusting relationship, with a trusted adult, then that's very easy to say, but it can be a very, very difficult thing for a child to do. It can be difficult as an adult, but if you're a child who's suffered adverse childhood experiences, who's suffered trauma, who's suffered loss, who's perhaps not been in a family where they've felt enabled to have a voice, or be seen or be heard, and that can be a really difficult thing. So as a directorate, as practitioners, as partners, we're really, really mindful of that. I think we've talked previously here, that when we do have inspections, when we do look at case file audits ourselves, so managers throughout the directorate will audit files, audit cases, and when they look at records, what they're seeing is this child alive when I read these records? Do I get a real sense of this child, a real sense of their wishes, of their views, of their feelings? So it's absolutely central to what we do. But again, it's something that we've got to be mindful of, and we've got to be focused on every day of the week, every interaction with a child. It's got to be at the forefront of our mind.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. On page 19, it references the working together update and review. I think the last time we discussed this in detail, we were making a submission to the consultation. And I know that we had a cross-party letter around the element of the assessment models being used for assessing risk around sex offenders. Was there an update on that, and were there any changes that came from it?
So we did have, I can provide more information, detailed information, perhaps after scrutiny itself. But yes, the police did lead on that piece of work. So really looking at assessments, assessment tools. There was a multidisciplinary, multi-agency event probably a few months ago now, I think at Ellen Road, where partners were brought together across the city. That was facilitated by police to look at some of the learning that we have had from reviews, that issue being one of them. So there's certainly that piece of work was done, there was recommendations made, and I'm very happy to give you further details about that, Councillor Stevenson, after the meeting.
Thank you, everybody, for that. We have two recommendations. Sorry, Farah, you wanted to come in? Oh, you got to be quicker.
I just wanted to come in relation to that final point. There wasn't anything on that nationally, but that's locally for Leeds. But also in relation to listening to children, where decisions are made in court, the children do have a children's guardian as well, who is there to represent their views. So I just wanted to add that in.
Try again. Thank you, everybody, for that. We have two recommendations. The first, that we note the content of the update report and the changes to statutory guidance, which outlines, but then, of course, to ask to receive a further update in autumn 2024, in line with further anticipated developments that are outlined in the report. Are we okay with both of those recommendations? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very, very much. That then brings us to item 8, page 31 on your packs, impact of asylum legislative guidance, changes on children. Who's going to kick us off? Thank you, Julie.
So as with the previous report, this report follows a report that was submitted to Scrutiny in September of last year. Today's report summarises the impact of national legislation and other changes affecting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The report also gives an update in relation to the impact, again, of national and local issues that do affect families who have no recourse to public funds. We know, and again, we're proud that Leeds is a child-friendly, is a compassionate city. Again, our services for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children have been highlighted as examples of really good practice. by external bodies, and they were specifically highlighted in the 2022 inspection of local authority children's services. So as such, we're really committed to staying abreast of national developments, of local, regional developments, and pressures, because we're absolutely committed to continuing to provide the very best service that we can for for these children and for these families, and again, often children who have suffered severe trauma and loss, and who really do need that high quality level of compassionate care and understanding. And again, the board is asked really just to note the content of the report, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Councillor Martin. This is your report.
Thank you very much. It's a good overview of some of the impacts, horrific impacts of the Illegal Immigration Act 2023 on children and families in Leeds, and it's and I've read how incorrect age assessments have led vulnerable children being placed in unaccompanied, very vulnerable children being placed unaccompanied in hostels where they're in danger of sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. Is that your understanding? In those adult hostels?
Yeah, so I think as the report today sets out, we have had instances in Leeds, and there are instances in other local authorities where the local authority that I directorate are receive referrals in relation to individuals within those hostels or hotels who colleagues feel may be unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And I think the report does refer to a number of children leading up to the Christmas period, whereby when we did take the more detailed age assessment, they were identified as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So it is an issue. It's a national issue. It is an issue that we do have in Leeds. But once that's brought to our attention, then we can ensure that there's that more robust, detailed assessment, which is undertaken by qualified social workers.
And how the threat of deportation to Rwanda means that 16 and 17-year-olds, rather than concentrating on their studies, thinking about how they can avoid such deportation and potentially being again pushed into criminality to avoid that. Is that a fair summary of what's happening?
I think we recognise that uncertainty for children does impact on them, but the practitioners working with children will support them through that, so help children access that support. But uncertainty does impact on them in relation to making future plans.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that if you can be in this situation anywhere, it's better to be in Leeds. I get that sense that we do our very best to look after children in this situation. And I also read about under section 15, and I should know the answer to this, but so is it the case that where a household has no recourse to public funds, the local authority can feed the children, but not the family? Is that how it works? And how are they housed?
So where a family has no recourse to public funds, under section 17, the local authority provides support. So we do an assessment, we have a no recourse to public funds panel, and we provide financial support for the family under section 17. So that might include housing costs, for example, rent. It will include costs for food bills, etc. We have a really good relationships with the third sector, so other support we will help the family access, but the children are the children are supported by a child in need under section 17.
So So we know, because we hear about how the financial situation that Leeds City Council, as
You're getting awfully close to a line here. I've just to say I've given quite a lot of leeway to some of the earlier. Just you're getting close to a line.
apologies, Chair. Can you tell us how much it's costing the local? Maybe not now, but in a future report, an assessment of the cost and scale of having to handle this situation would be helpful.
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I haven't got that detail to it. We can absolutely
Okay.
provide the
Yeah,
detail.
so
I mean,
we
one of the
can-
things,
Thanks.
I suppose you're making me think, you're reminding me, during the and I think I've referenced it here previously, during the 2022 ILAC, Inspection of Local Authority Children's Services. One of the reasons that the inspectors really highlighted the practice in Leeds was because they did meet with a group of unaccompanied asylum seeking children. And it really goes back to Councillor Martin, I suppose, to that sense of belonging, you know, and how we want to ensure that children in the city do have that sense of belonging. And it was a young boy who had shared with the inspectors that when he had been given his welcome pack, so we pulled together, you know, packs to welcome children, that when he opened his welcome pack and he found a prayer mat, that actually he really felt that he was at home, and it really gave him that sense of belonging. So, you know, sometimes it's the little things, you know, again, it's being mindful of culture, it's being mindful of identity, and just the little things that can make a huge amount of difference to these children.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Martin, as well, for your persistence on this. I think it is a really important topic. I wanted to ask about the age assessments. This is page 33.12. So talking about those times where children have been incorrectly assessed. I mean, talking here, it says that this resulted in Children's Services assessing that 12 of the 16 young people were either under 18 years of age or would need to be accommodated. I mean, I find it pretty shocking that's a 25% accuracy rate from the Home Office, and I do think it's a legitimate question for all of us to ask. When there are mistakes that happen, and when we have that level of accuracy, is the funding provided nationally where there have been mistakes from a national agency? Do they provide us as a local authority the funding that is necessary to accommodate that? Because I think this is quite shocking, and if I'm purely focusing on the financial aspect of it, but of course there is the emotional aspect for those young people. There are the safeguarding concerns about children potentially being placed in very dangerous situations, as Councillor Martin alluded to. So could we get a bit more information about the funding, please?
Yeah, sure. Again, we can provide more detail on that. I mean, essentially, and it's set out in the report, and this is the same for every local authority, the funding that we do receive for unaccompanied asylum seeking children does not meet the totality of the costs that are incurred by local authorities, because by the very nature, you know, children who are unaccompanied asylum seeking children do become children looked after. In addition, they then you know, when they reach 18, they become care leavers, and obviously there's a statutory responsibility, quite rightly so, for the local authority to continue to provide them with a range of services, you know, both pre-18 and post-18.
Thank you, Chair. So just for the sake of clarity, for the in those cases where there's been an incorrect age assessment, can the money that the local authority has had to spend on that be recouped? Is there a way to get that money back from central government?
Do you mean, I'm just trying to clarify the question really. Do you mean for the purpose of the assessment, or I'm not 100% sure what the question is?
Right, okay.
Apologies.
No, that's okay. So it says the bit about age assessments, and particularly point 12. So where there are where there have been mistakes in the assessment of a child, a young person, they've been deemed as adults when in fact they're not. Obviously, there are additional costs which have to come to the local authority. Is that money recouped subsequently, both in terms of the support for those young people, but also the costs that have had to that have been incurred as a result of the Home Office's incompetence?
Yeah, in some ways, I suppose the cost of a looked after child is higher, so the costs of providing accommodation, the statutory intervention, the social work support, which is wrapped around a child, is significant in comparison to an adult who will be residing in hostel accommodation. What we do is we do have really close working relationships with Migration West Yorkshire. Clearly this is it is an area of concern, for local authorities across the country. So we, regionally, in terms of Yorkshire and Humberside, the regional directors of children's services do meet with DFE on a regular occasion, almost a monthly occasion. And this is a very active topic of our conversations at the moment, both in terms of I suppose what we've just described in terms of wanting to get the best for children, and key to that is early identification of a child when they are an unaccompanied asylum seeking child, but equally the issue around costs and the impact on local authorities, because we don't recoup those full costs. So it is an issue that is is very live at the moment. Thank you.
So Councillor Carter, then Councillor Gruen.
Anybody who's brought up children knows that there can be a large disparity between how children grow up and how they develop. For example, if you watch children playing rugby at 15, some of them will have full beards. Others will look as though they're very much younger. It must be extremely difficult to assess a child's age. So I'm not sure that the Home Office is being incompetent, and I think it's more about my daughter, for example, is 40. She looks 18. It must be extremely difficult to assess a child's age. So there must be a bit of leeway either way. I think it's really unfair to say that the Home Office is incompetent and the council is right in their assessment of a child. I think, it's much more fluid than that. You really can't assess a child's age that easily.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gruen.
I just wanted to clarify, if we have children who've been assessed as being children, unaccompanied asylum seeking people, do they then go through the normal system of placement? So when you say they become a looked after child, that could be in a number of contexts. It might be in a children's home, it might be placement with carers, or it might be a kinship placement. They're then in the normal system, are they?
Councillor Gruen, that's really helpful. Yes, absolutely. Where we identify that we have an unaccompanied asylum seeking child, they become a child looked after, and they then benefit from all of the support, statutory support that a child is entitled to. And you're quite right, obviously in assessing that child's needs, their placement will depend on those needs, and where we feel that they, which placement is best placed to meet those needs. And that was the point I was making. Obviously, in terms of becoming a looked after child, when they reach 18, they then become a care leaver and have that status as a care leaver.
That's helpful. And I actually think this merits a further paper with more of that kind of detail in it, if I'm quite honest, because I find some of the figures in here quite difficult. For example, point 11, research by Helen Bamber shows that in 2022, approximately 850 children were incorrectly assessed. 850 children from where? Leeds, England, nationally? It's a sort of isolated figure. And it seems to me from the discussion we've had this morning that the issue is wrong assessments. So where children are correctly identified as children, then they are securely in our looked after system. But it's where wrong assessments are made that there is a problem. And I think, you know, we'd like to have a paper that looks a little bit more carefully at that issue, please.
Just to comment, one of the things I was going to suggest was in any event, I think this is something that we should bring back again in 6 months. I think it's something that I would suggest as a board, we keep a watching brief on. And I think I'm conscious not to bring it back too often because I think we lose some of the laser light sharpness on it. But I would suggest whoever's sat here in September would be a good time to look at this and perhaps bring out some of that information that Councillor Gruen has also mentioned, you know, perhaps with a specific focus around the age assessments and some of the data around there. Sorry, I came in as you were about to say something. No, you weren't. Okay. Councillor Martin, you look like you're about to.
One comment really on there seemed to be a misplaced pity for the Home Office's position, and I just think compared to the situation of children who are in danger of being criminally and sexually exploited in Leeds, it's a bit misplaced. It's a bit off. Thank you. That's all.
I have to give you the right to come back on that, Councillor Carter.
Yes, you deliberately misunderstood what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that the Home Office are wrong and the council are right. I'm saying it is very difficult to assess a child's age. It is. You can't, if you go into a field of kids, you can't say, oh, that child is 12, that child is 18. You can't do that because it's very difficult to assess them.
Well, my observation, I think you can go backwards and forwards. You made a comment, it's been answered. I think we can go backwards and forwards. I think actually what the data shows actually from this report is that there are challenges in age assessments and it needs specialist people to do it. It would perhaps seem logical that the Home Office should have those people in the right place at the right time. But let's remember, because you're going to go backwards and forwards because you don't agree. She doesn't agree. I don't think anyone disputes that the consequences are worse for the child. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. I think the point we're making is, I don't think anyone would disagree, assessing a young person's age can be a challenge. If it wasn't a challenge, we wouldn't be in the situation. Caroline, then Ryan, and then we're going to bring this piece to a close.
A short point, this, but not insignificant, because once you were describing to me the looked after system, you also said that there would be post-18 support in the usual way. I'm just raising this because it was a very strong point that was made at the meeting last night that's already been referred to. Actually, there were 4 of us at that meeting, and James and John did raise the issue very strongly about the support that's post-18 and the handover to, because it's 2 different services, isn't it, adult and children's. And the children, the young people who were there, their view was, and much was made of the handover, so this will be your person and it will continue and you will get support. But neither of them felt that they'd had that support. Once that handover had happened, neither of them felt they were having the support post-18 that they felt they should be entitled to. And there was a general dissatisfaction, I have to say, with social workers as well. I mean, you know, personalities and all the rest of it are in that mix, aren't they? But I think particularly for these children who are unaccompanied asylum seekers, that's post-18 support is really, really needed. And if it's a weak spot, perhaps we should be examining it, you know, carefully.
So I think for me, this does go back to the voice of children, doesn't it, and the voice of young people. Again, I think it was the last meeting or the meeting before where Hannah Lamplugh brought her annual report in terms of all of the work that does go on to get the views of children and young people so that we can improve our services. I think an example of that, as an example, is Archway, which we do now have, which is a single, I suppose, point of contact for children who have left care, including unaccompanied asylum seeking children, where they know, if they do have an issue, if they do have, any problem at all, they know that they can go there and that there will be people there, not only social work qualified professionals, but a range of different professionals. Sunday lunches, group work around education, training, employment. I think for me, it does go back to relationships, doesn't it, really? And again, how do we ensure, and this is what's, it's really great actually to see, in Stable Homes Built on Love, which is the report which has come about as a result of the National Review into Children's Social Care, the recommendation in there, that's been taken up at a national level, that children leaving care must have, and children looked after must have, trusting relationships with, I think it's at least 3 adults. And again, that's something that we are really, really mindful. There's always more to do, Councillor Gruen, and we recognise that. But again, it's an area that we're really, really passionate about. We are corporate parents, to these children, and we will continue to do our very best and to listen to the feedback that we get.
Thank you. Last contribution, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a few questions. It's quite a big area. I just want to start by saying, I think others around the table know I've been involved in the process of assisting those who've arrived in the country illegally and claimed asylum from the Afghanistan relocation scheme children, and my experience of that has been that actually, as Julie said, the multi-agency working around that, from Home Office, the council, our schools, academies, agencies, has been phenomenal, and there have been challenges along the way in terms of finding permanent residencies and homes, and making sure that the children have the very best time possible whilst they've been in Leeds, and that has been exemplary, and incredibly proud that our Young Person of the Year last year was one of those students as well. Not to detract from that, there's just a few questions I had on the paper at page 33 relating to those who have arrived in the country by illegal routes claiming asylum. It's difficult when we talk about under 18s and children, because we all have a different view of what a child is, and although the law is very clear, under 18 is a child. On the cases that are referenced here, the 16 young people who were reassessed, are we talking 5-6 year olds, or are we talking 16-17 year olds?
We're talking between 15 to 18 year olds.
So further to Councillor Edwards' point, I look to the other side of the statistics as well. It worries me immensely that of those just where a social worker, a welfare officer has raised an alarm, 1 in 4 were adults. So in those circumstances, that means that 1 in 4 of those that have been flagged have entered the UK illegally to claim asylum, by legal means claim asylum, and are trying to get themselves into a children's setting. So where that happens, what's the council's role in then assisting either a route of prosecution or deportation or otherwise? What's the role the council plays once we agree that they are an adult and they are trying to get themselves into a children's setting?
Yeah, I think, where we have referrals in relation to these individuals, it's where another professional, in the main will feel or will have a concern that this is a child as opposed to an adult. I'm not aware of, there being a theme or a pattern where we have adults who are trying to present as children, that's not a theme, that's not a pattern that I am aware of in Leeds. I think, our role as a Children and Families Directorate is to ensure that we have effective services in place to provide help and protection to children. So where we do have a referral by an agency or another professional who feels that there may be a child in adult provision, our statutory responsibility and duty is to undertake that assessment, and that is what we do. We do that by qualified individuals, and where we find that assessment, finds that that is a child, then we will respond appropriately, and that's our responsibility, and we carry that out to its full.
Yeah, as I understand, as I understand para 12, what we're saying is there were 16 people in an adult provision where a professional had identified that those 16 people needed re-looking at, all in an adult setting, of which we ended up thinking that 12 of those were indeed young people. So I don't think it's the case, Councillor Stevenson, that they were in a youth provision, rather that there was a flag raised on 16 in an adult provision, of which ultimately 12 were reallocated based on a reassessment of their ages. Am I describing that correctly? So that's my understanding of that. Thanks.
Right. That's fine. So it's not the case then that people are saying they are children. It's the case that the local authority is actively going out into the adult's estate to try and make sure that we haven't got children there.
It's neither, Councillor Stevenson. It's that the local authority are responding effectively when we have a referral from another professional who feels that there may be a child in adult provision who actually ought to be looked after.
Okay. The next question I had, Chair, was just linked to the point Councillor Martin raised about examples, and I think I heard that we'd had examples in Leeds of an unaccompanied child asylum seeker who had been a subject of sex-based crimes or violence or otherwise in an adult hostel. So by the very definition, that the perpetrator of that crime must be also an asylum seeker in the hostel. So similar to my previous question, what role does the council have there, not just on safeguarding, but in supporting a prosecution and a deportation of somebody who has committed a crime in the country against a child or indeed anybody else?
So obviously I can't talk about individual cases without, here, you wouldn't expect me to. As Director of Children and Families, I have statutory responsibility to provide effective services to ensure that we are helping and protecting children in the city. So as with any individual set of circumstances where we are made aware that we do have a child who has suffered or is at risk of significant harm, we will have a strategy discussion. That strategy discussion will include, at a minimum, police and health and children's social care. At that point, police clearly have a role in terms of any criminal investigation and any action to be taken as a consequence of that. Children's Services' role and statutory responsibility is around providing effective help and protection to children, and that is what we do.
And my final question, Chair, just to sorry, I'm just doing the quick calculation I was going to ask. On first to Councillor Grewin's point, I think it would be really useful that when when we do have an update, we have some sourcing of the statistics within, because I mean, on those 16 referrals where you're saying that 12 were, I understand that 12 were actually should have been a children's estate, incorrectly assessed. That was just within a 1 week episode, and that's only where officers found them. How many others slipped through the net as such? So if that's 12 in a week, and it is almost presented as a pattern, Julie, in a sense that what you're describing to us, then over a year that's 624 just in Leeds, and it cannot be the case that if there's 850 nationally, Leeds is some sort of hub for a destination to get to. So I think next time just some sourcing and timeframes will be very useful.
It would be really helpful to do that. And I think this is the richness of having the conversation at Scrutiny, isn't it? That we have a conversation and it will lead us to identify other information which will be helpful to present. I have to say that week leading up to Christmas was an unusual week. You know, that's, those numbers in a sense were high. But yeah, I'd be really happy to come back and bring more information as has been requested.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks, colleagues. That was really helpful. We have two recommendations. The first, obviously, that we note and endorse the update report, and I think we do. Looking around, I see no dissent. The second, that I think it's really important that we do look to keep this on our radar, and I would suggest 6 months. With a real focus, if we could please, to pick up some of the points board has made around age assessments and just some of the data streams coming from that, and hopefully by then some of the deeper learning that we might be getting of themes coming through. Yeah, is that okay, everybody? I see nods. Thank you. Okay. We're just after 11 o'clock. I suggest a 5-minute comfort break, and then we will deal with items 9. It goes 9 and then it goes straight to 11. So 9, 10 and 11. Thanks. So quick 5-minute break. Thank you, everybody. So we are moving to agenda item 9, which is our draft inquiry report for the provision of EHCP support in Leeds. Can I just start off by a big thank you to officers and to everybody who's fed into this, obviously colleagues as well on the board, for the way we've approached this. Officers and the director have been really open to looking at how we improve this experience and how we move this forward. I suspect that would not be the case in every authority in the country. So I think it's really I think it's important that we note that we have been pushing on an open door on this piece. So there isn't a huge amount I want to say on this, but Julie, do you want to lead us off?
Just briefly, Chair, I suppose just to say that, the Directorate has recognised, when I came into post substantively as Director, that we did have significant improvements to make in relation to our services and support for children in the city who do have special educational needs and disability, and their families, thinking about that Think Family approach. And that's both in terms of ensuring that we're fulfilling our statutory responsibilities, but also, that we are achieving positive outcomes for those children so that they can go on to fulfill their potential in life. So, obviously, we have commissioned, PwC. So we have been working very closely alongside PwC, alongside our partners. I think it's important to say right across the city. So that's children, young people, parents, carers, our education leaders in the city. So that, for me, this has got to be about co-production. It's got to be, the early discussion that we've just had about listening to the feedback and the wishes and the feelings of children looked after. This is also about that collaboration and working with children and families so that we can ultimately improve our services, and we're absolutely determined to do so.
Councillor Pryor?
Yeah, very briefly, just to really welcome this draft report. I think it goes without saying that within the education part of my portfolio, this is certainly the most challenging element at the moment. It's a national issue, of course it is, and there are, of course, asks we have from the government, but without straying into that, we're really determined that we have a Leeds response to this as well, and do everything we can within our power to improve outcomes for children and families. And I just really welcome Scrutiny's input in this, which of course will be feeding into all of the work we do to improve things.
You'll have noted, Councillor Pratt, actually our second recommendation around the funding piece absolutely recognises the funding situation, and not least around the funding formula. You and I suspect most of us are on the exact same page in terms of the funding formula and the caps. I don't think anyone around this table is going to argue particularly on that, which is why we do need to try and work cross-party to look at dealing with that. Colleagues, we tried to capture within the report and within just 10 recommendations, which I think should hopefully be meaningful and workable, and in terms of something that we can monitor going forward, progress against those. Welcome any comments, questions from colleagues, obviously.
Can I just, and forgive me for this because I just might not be quite on top of it, but recommendation 6, I just wasn't, in my mind, I wasn't quite clear about what we were recommending there. Totally accepted the need to avoid kind of overuse of tribunals, although obviously that's at the behest of parents to decide on whether they want to go there, and to prioritise other forms of mediation. Now, as I understand it, mediation is already a part of the process before tribunal. In my personal experience, very much a box ticking exercise, but that is in my experience of mediation on the way to tribunal. Is it better quality mediation we're kind of recommending there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it is, and I can certainly. This is a draft inquiry report, so I can certainly pick those comments up and tighten them up. I could probably have a word with you outside the meeting to make sure I've got the specifics of that and get that exactly right. Absolutely, yeah.
I've just got a question, and to be honest, this week I have a good thorough read through the report, but our pay indicative ballot ends tomorrow, so I've not had time. So apologies if the answer is in here, but I just wanted to ask you, what is the time frame once an EHCP has been written and submitted between that and a place being obtained for a child, if that's considered the correct route?
So if I could come in on that one, it's a 20-week process. So from the moment that the request to assess has been received, we have 20 weeks to issue an EHCP. And at that stage of the issuing, we also name a setting or a provision within that section. So it's a 20-week process.
Thank you. Could I just come back in quickly on that? Because I'm hearing, and I'm not saying this is any fault of the council, but sometimes that the time criteria is not always met because there's such a shortage of places. And also on top of that, I mean, it might be something that you want to discuss at another time, but the proposal or the question that I asked and that I emailed to the council and that you responded to on ideas for getting adults into schools to support where those places haven't been found and those pupils are really suffering, and then that's impacting other children in the setting. I'm happy to add that for you to come back on that here or later.
So if I can come back on the first one, it isn't just that there's a lack of places that's causing the challenge around 20 weeks. It's a multifaceted challenge, which is part of our internal processes in terms of how quickly we can process the demand in terms of the number of requests for EHCPs that are coming in. There will be some solutions to that we're going to be tackling over the next few months. And there is a challenge as well around availability of provision, which is another solution that we need to look at. In terms of your point around, I think we were talking about psychologists who are at a sort of preclinical point in their training, and the idea of marrying up people who were training and the need for sort of human resource in schools. It has been tried in the past, and I've seen it, but it's, I suppose, more effective on a clinical psychology perspective for people that might be going in to do mental health support rather than education psychology. But we do have a way of creating the supply chain of recruits into the EdSite team where we have trainee EdSites who could come in and do some work, but all of the work that EdSites do, which is then part of an EHCP, has to be signed off by an education psychologist. So we might be talking about two different things: the clinical psychology and those colleagues who are training at university and who need a certain level of clinical experience to be able to qualify. You could create a system whereby we could speak to local higher education providers to deploy them into schools to be part of the graduated response around mental health. So that it's possible, but there is quite a significant challenge around it.
So can I just focus your question ever so slightly, if I may? Because your question was, what's the time frame between the beginning of an EHCP and a placement? But an EHCP does not necessarily lead to a placement. So my understanding is there's not a time frame, is there, between the EHCP process is allegedly 20 weeks beginning to one end, but there isn't a specific time frame for the placement, or is there?
I suppose it depends what you mean by placement. Every EHCP will have in section I a setting, which is the place that we name that the young person or child goes to for their education. That is a placement. as far as I'm concerned. If you mean an independent placement or a placement in a specialist provision, that will also be named if it's felt that it's appropriate in terms of meeting the needs of the child, and that should be in place in theory when the HCP is issued.
And is it?
Not as frequently as any of us in this room would like. At the moment, as you know, our EHCP timeliness figures are much lower than we would all want. So no.
Could I just ask on my second question, is it in terms of pairing up with universities, is that something that Leeds are considering doing, or would it be too difficult and too much work?
I think we're at a very early stage in the kind of scoping around that, so I couldn't give you an answer either way at this point.
Sorry, Councillor Gruen, then Councillor Stevenson, then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. My question was the same as Helen's about timing. When I looked through, I know it's supposed to be a 20-week process, but the feel I had from the parents who attended this meeting on 2 occasions was that was their main issue, actually, the amount of time it took to complete the process and the amount of chasing up they felt they had to do personally. So I wondered whether there should be a recommendation about sticking to the 20 weeks or reducing the amount of times it overspills the 20 weeks. I see that as a major issue, and I know you've explained the processes about why that is. But if we're going to see the improvements that the parents were saying they wanted, then I think we're going to have to be more accurate with the 20 weeks. And I don't think that is directly addressed in the recommendations, unless I've missed it. The second point I wanted to make was on the digital EHCPs, which I think is a really good idea. One of my constituents shared with me her son's EHCP in physical form in a printed out version. Well, it wasn't printed out, it was handwritten actually. And frankly, it really was a mess. It was extremely difficult to read and make any sense of. I mean, it just looked like a collection of miscellaneous notes written by different people in different hands. And she wanted me to advise her on it. And I couldn't, as a professional, I couldn't make any sense of it. So I think in that recommendation about digital EHCPs, there might be something about the coherence and the layout and the presentation of those, because if you're not one of your team, it's very difficult to understand them.
Just to reassure Councillor Green, even though the 20 weeks isn't explicit in the scrutiny recommendations, that is often the focus of our conversations and is an absolute top priority to bring that down.
Would I be able to just come back on those 2 points? I think, first of all, around the 20 weeks, the work that we have been doing, as you've heard about in this room with PwC, all of the work that we're doing there will absolutely be focusing on increasing productivity and therefore doing more with the same amount of resource, and therefore, we hope, reducing the amount of time and increasing our compliance with that 20-week deadline. To the bit around EHCP, the digital EHCPs, I suppose all of our EHCPs are digital in that they are stored in a digital form on a Word document, for example. But there is a national move towards creating a system whereby all of the information is held in the cloud, and parents and carers and SENCOs and teachers can access the document in its kind of real-time draft form and look at it and see its progress from end to end. And that's certainly something that we're exploring, both as part of the Change Programme Partnership, which is a DFE funded pilot of the Right Support, Right Place, Right Time action plan, but also there's the possibility of buying an off-the-peg digital EHCP product that may be something that we look at.
I just wanted to come in really because I think that, looking at digitalisation again is really based on direct feedback, not only from children, young people and parents and carers, but also from our school leaders in the city. So where we do have a situation at the moment where people are having to relay information again and again and again. You know, just as Dan said, it's not coming in a coordinated way. People feeling that they're having to tell the story again. Just again, reducing bureaucracy, because actually, if we're wanting to reduce, ensure that we're meeting our statutory timeframe, there's something about being as efficient as we possibly can. So there's something here about improved processes to improve the experience of, our partners, also children, young people and families, but also just reducing that bureaucracy so that we can be as efficient as possible. And also, we're having more and more conversations, I suppose, about the need for us to be abreast of, what would you say, technology, essentially, and so we are looking out. I think part of a learning organisation and a learning directorate is about looking out to examples of best practice elsewhere, and that's what we are doing through our work with PwC and also through the work that Scrutiny is leading on this.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson. I've seen you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. On recommendation 8, practice over process, I think my observation of the feedback we had from the parent group was that yes, of course, that would be the gold standard when everything works well and as it should, and parents would acknowledge and want that we would be putting practice over something like process of meeting timescales. If you're going to get it right and do it properly, that's fine. So when it works, the idea of practice over process is fine. The problem I think we've had is that we aren't delivering those things, and therefore the only recourse of parents is to challenge on process. So I think it's fine. I think it just needs to acknowledge that the relationship between the authority and like the parent carer group is going to be vital in giving the security of understanding that when we say practice over process, it's because collectively on both sides we want to get the best possible outcomes for the child, but also acknowledge that the only real recourse that parents have is to challenge process, and they're almost forced to do that legally. So this is the place we need to get to. We're clearly not there yet, we'll acknowledge that. We've got to take the parents and carers with us and make sure that they really understand what that means in practice. And I know Dan will come back, but just whilst I'm there, just to say, as on communication and engagement, a reminder point, one thing I'm picking up of late is that we must have a very high staff absence issue at the minute. And it seems to me that whoever the caseworker is, it's dealing with something, when they go on leave, nobody's looking at their emails. And so the parent is then chasing, why am I getting a response? And just get nothing. And then 8 weeks later, they say, oh yeah, he's been on leave for 8 weeks and nobody's looking. So we need to rectify that.
Just wanted to come in, thanks Councillor Stevenson, on the practice process sort of dichotomy, because I think we sometimes separate those and they aren't necessarily separate. I think we might think of practice as the way that we work in schools to deliver the content of an EHCP, and the process is what we do within Sensat, but actually the way that we do our process is actually the practice of the people who are doing that work, and the practice around customer services, responsiveness, communication that you've sort of picked up on there. That's our practice, which is part of our process. I think I don't think we should necessarily try and take them apart too far, because I think they're one and the same thing depending on which team you're looking at. I absolutely take on the chin the suggestion that we need to improve communication, and I think we need to have systems in place that help us to be more resilient when we do have staff absence. That's easy for me to say. I had a conversation this morning with the Sensat team where that absence is, and that sense of that team who work incredibly hard and probably feel that they're not recognised for the work that they do, and all they ever hear is what's bad about what they do. And so it's a tricky balance for us. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these are some incredibly committed people who work for us, who we really want to nurture and support in doing their jobs, as well as challenging ourselves to create an environment in which they can do their best.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in as well, I suppose, just in relation to the practice over process. I think perhaps it's more, what would you say, more accurate maybe to say, practice driving process, because what we don't want is for the process to become the focus, and the bureaucracy and the process being a process in its own right. This is about practice driving that process, and that comes back to culture. It comes back to what are the processes that we need in place to ensure that we've got the welfare of the child central, and ensuring that we're getting those outcomes for the children and the family. So for me, there's something about practice informing, driving process, which I just wanted to highlight. I think, Dan certainly and others have met with parents and carers since they were last here at Scrutiny. I was actually due to meet a couple of the parents last week, and they had to reschedule that meeting. So, again, there's an absolute commitment from us as a directorate and throughout the partnership really to be working together on these improvements with, with children, with young people, with parents and carers.
I think that's a really, really helpful point, Julie. Can we pick that up and make it as a recommendation that we do change the wording of that? It's a small thing, but it really matters. So to practice driving process.
Just to recap, this is a draft report. Our job is to shape that. It's why our April meeting is so important, because this is part of a process as well. Well, we shall cultivate this together. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of the points around casework processes are important. I've recognised what Councillor Stevenson was saying. I do also acknowledge what you were saying, Dan, as well. And I think there are two sides of this as well. There are our staff members who are working incredibly hard, and but equally for the parents who come to us, they don't want to hear excuses. They want answers, and we would as well if it were our child. I do think that recommendation 4 around improved casework processes is particularly important. If we can have a dedicated person, a dedicated member of staff or members of staff who deal with members' inquiries, because I think all of us, whichever side of the chamber we sit on, we want to support parents. We also want to work with staff. These are not easy issues to be working through, and if we know that we can come to people with confidence and that we will get an update on where things are, we have something that we can then go back to our residents with, and we can communicate with people. I think that's what's important, because I'm sure we've all had the experience that we can share something and it can seem like it takes a long time before we get feedback, and that also makes it a little bit harder for us as elected members when we're communicating with our residents. So I think it's something that would be mutually supportive. Also on recommendation 3 about digital EHCPs, I do strongly support this, although I think we should retain a non-digital option as well, because not everybody feels comfortable with that format. But as a general principle, I think we should be heading towards that. I think also in terms of transparency, it allows people to see what has been written, and it allows people to access it easily. So different professionals, the parents, schools and so on. Would it be helpful to have some sort of guidance that goes with that? So guidance in plain English or accompanying notes, because when we had some of the parent representatives here, they spoke very fluently, they were very articulate, and many of our residents who come to us, the ones who approach us as councillors, are very often articulate, and they're very persistent as well, and that's important. But I'm also conscious that there are people who do not have that confidence either to approach officials or to approach us as elected representatives. There are people for whom English is not their first language. There are people for whom English is their first language, but they wouldn't feel comfortable challenging authority. And so I think we do need to have that guidance as well. And so I strongly agree with that bit, but maybe if we could bring that point out a bit more clearly, just making sure that it's as accessible as possible for a range of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got 2 points, Chair. The first one is, and possibly it's a question rather, with the digital, and improving casework processes, would that mean if someone is ill from the the clinical and all that, will that information will other staff be able to get that information processes within this 20 weeks? Is that what it's going to do? And can the parents be able to trace all that? Or what is the cloud going to do? Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. I don't purport to be an expert in technology. However, yeah, absolutely. This is about transparency. It is about, as we've said, being able to utilise our resource to best effect. And there's something there about almost having a team approach, if you like, to EHCPs and ownership, across the board of all of the children who are, in that assessment process, so that, if we do have colleagues who are absent, it might be holidays, it might not necessarily be, but actually, if we need to look, we can go in. It is there, it's transparent, it's clear, whether that's for a child or young person, a SENCO, somebody from the SENSAP team, absolutely, yeah.
That's great. And just looking at the, the whole aims of the inquiry and what the recommendations are. As you all know, I am quite, I like coming in with SEND, where the children or the child might be of low spectrum. I've got a child that is of a low spectrum, meaning that they do not fall in the highest where they need a EHCP. And it's quite difficult when you've got to help them in terms of what is there for them in the education setup. For some reason, the teaching section does not know what to do with those kids. You as a parent could be thinking that this child is dyslexic, but because being dyslexic, you've got to go private to get that assessed and then come back into, there's nothing there, I would say, from my view. For the children that are of low spectrum, it would be great if that could be, that could also be something that we'll look into in terms of, especially when they're going towards they are GS, the GCS, and there's nothing. They do have something, but it's not as great as it should be.
I think it's a really well made point, and obviously this report is about EHCPs, but the way that we support children who are below the threshold for accessing an EHCP, there's something about how much more coherently we can present the offer, because there is actually a lot out there, and this is a lot of things that are available in terms of early support and prevention and help. There's more that we need to do, I think, and that's a fair comment, but I think that there's a lot we could do about being better at signposting and making teachers aware of what the offer is out there. We consistently find that when we talk to SENCOs and teachers and other, that they weren't aware of support that was available. So something about really clarifying the offer and then identifying within that where the gaps are, because then we can work across our SEND partnership with health and other partners to see how possible it is to commission things to fill those gaps.
Is it possible that with this, is it possible that maybe your team could request for, especially in education, I don't know, some results in what the kids I don't know how to put this through, but I hope it makes sense for yourselves to understand in terms of education, the results of the children's, what they actually results are in school, because I think they're really low, but that is because there's not so much help. And maybe that could lead us in understanding whether, how do we then have a formal EACP or a formal way of helping them in school?
It's another really good question. We find from the data that nationally and locally, children with identified special educational needs, but who are not having it, who don't have an EHCP, consistently underperform as a consequence of that lack of support. And we usually find that the gap is less with children who do have an EHCP because they have the resource and support. So what you're almost saying is that what is there, what can we make available for children who don't have an EHCP but who do have needs, to ensure that we're supporting. And there's something about training. So how do we make sure that we use the various different training products, whether that's from NASEN or the Autism Education Trust or various other products that are there, to ensure that we're training all teachers in all classrooms to all be teachers of SEND. That's because that's relatively low investment for really positive outcome. I should have added before that, our approach to family hubs and family help, we are recruiting SEND navigators to be part of that, because we know that sometimes, especially at an early age, SEND and other needs can quite often become confused and we don't know what it is. So having a SEND navigator in at that family hub model will help to signpost very quickly to some of those early bits of support, which should help.
To come in really quickly, because I think really what we're saying is that the importance of early intervention and prevention. What we don't want to do is to wait until a child requires an assessment for an EHCP. For those children, as Dana said, who perhaps don't meet the threshold for an EHCP, there's something about how collectively, as a system, pre-birth, in our in our nurseries, in our early years settings, in our primary schools, how do we work as a system to ensure that we've got effective early intervention and prevention? And that's got to be multi-agency, and that's a key focus going forward for our family help services.
Thank you. Councillor Bromley.
Thank you. I'm really pleased reading through these recommendations. It seems like there's a really high focus on getting the information out there, communicating it, and then making sure that there's an accessibility to the support. So I'm really pleased reading through these. One thing I would point out, though, rather than there being such a focus on a time frame, like 20 weeks we were saying, that what do we implement in the meantime is a recommendation that we can give to schools if it's affecting attendance and if it's affecting their relationships and learning within school already. Once it is initially flagged that they may need more support, is there something that can be given and offered via schools, like flexible timetables and within the school environment, having access to somebody to talk to while we're waiting for the actual support necessary given? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because parents, as we've heard in this room, and carers absolutely care about the 20 weeks, because it's one of the things they've got to say, do what you're supposed to do. And so I think our response around that timeliness and caring about that as much as well is because we see that that's the thing that parents and carers have got to be able to hold us to account. And I think so it's right that we pay attention to that. We quite often see that that sort of conversation about a diagnosis, and quite often it becomes a health related question where you're saying, I'm waiting for a diagnosis. What are you doing in the meantime? There's an enormous amount that we can do in the meantime. And in fact, it should be that we do things anyway, because we're meeting needs as they present rather than waiting for a diagnosis before we act. So there's a little bit there that I think I can see that we agree on that. In terms of what's available for schools pending an EHCP being awarded, there is, I mean, we've talked about funding for inclusion previously, and that's sort of why funding for inclusion exists, certainly in the early years, is to provide immediate short-term funding to identify ways of meeting need and preventing escalation in demand. I think there's more we can do around that. We sort of touched on the training offer previously, so I think we're in agreement.
Thank you for that. Helen.
So first, just to say, we all know that many schools at the moment are operating kind of skeleton staffing, so it's really difficult to meet extra needs without funding. But I think it would be really useful if not only schools were made aware of what was available for those children who don't quite hit the criteria for an EHCP at that time, but also that they have a responsibility to communicate those to parents, because that would be another way that that information could be out there. Obviously, it could be on the council website, it could go through the family hubs, but not everybody will access those. And I think that might be really useful. And also as a parent, I think some schools do better at that, just naturally do better than that. And I know it shouldn't be the case that it's not always the same level across the board, but I think parents in that kind of situation should be asking the questions, and if they don't feel like they're getting the support, consider looking at other education establishments.
Thank you for that, Helen. Jules.
Yeah, just going through the recommendations as people are, and recommendation 2 is regarding funding. And obviously there's been, we know from the wording of recommendation 2 that there are issues with the funding, and that if we had you know, the funding, I'm going to call it the missing funding. If we had that, then we could address a lot of these issues, you know, with that funding. So, and the board in January agreed to support all efforts to you know, assure additional funding through the funding formula and lobbying. So, can I suggest that we have a cross-party letter from this board to support that increase in funding, and we could, you know, we could do that over email, and we could then agree at the April meeting.
Jules, actually the 4th line up from the bottom starts off the board therefore supports further action to lobby government.
Yes, that's why I'm saying.
Yeah,
we write a letter, a cross-party letter in support of that increased funding.
Yeah, happy to look at that. Absolutely happy to look at that. The point I was making is that I agree with you, which is why it's specifically in there. I don't know. I was looking at you. Sorry. Anybody else? Thank you. So one of the key things that has come out is around, and it's particularly just needing to strengthen that the timeliness piece is actually the curse of having read through the recommendations so many times that actually that missed my eyes, if I'm completely candid. So we'll make sure that we do spotlight, because that's a statutory obligation on the council. So I think we've got to flag that up, and then we can also just flag through some of the other points that have been made, tighten those up, and obviously we'll then send those out. Is that okay with everybody? So we have commented in, amended and agreed the draft inquiry report, or we'll agree it when it comes out before. And then we will obviously get the final report, hopefully for approval in April. That was the second recommendation. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah? Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Takes us to the work programme. Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just fairly briefly on this, I think. So the next meeting is our last meeting. To note that that's on a Thursday at 1:30 p.m. So slightly different arrangements to the 1:15 pre-meet. The main thing to note as a change from last time is that we had thought to consider the youth justice plan strategy or update. And unfortunately, due to timing issues, that is now no longer going to be possible. So that will move into the next municipal year. However, it will be possible to meet our commitments under the budget and policy framework. So just to note that that will not be on the agenda in April. And further to discussion in February, there will be a report on the co-opted members that has come up a number of times. So I will try and pull that together into a review type report for the board to consider before the end of the municipal year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everybody, very much for today. Thank you all for your contributions. Really helpful. And we will meet again on Thursday, the 18th at 1:30. Pre-meet at 1:15. Thank you, everybody. Meeting closed.